Hello, I'm Angelica Patterson, and I'm so honored to have been invited to this symposium to speak to you about the physiological responses of trees to increasing atmospheric temperatures, which may be driving climate-induced tree migration, as well as the ecological consequences behind tree species replacements and its effects on forest carbon dynamics. But first, to understand the interactions between climate and forested communities, we have to understand global carbon dynamics. Here's an overview of the global carbon cycle, which shows various sources of CO2, such as fossil fuels, cement production, soil and plant respiration, land use, and oceans, and sinks or places where atmospheric carbon is stored, oceans, photosynthesis. When we calculate the net sinks and sources, we find that there is an extra sink missing, or excess carbon that is unaccounted for, and plants and forests are an important place to look. So how much CO2 can plants offset? Authors of this paper in 2011 found that temperate and tropical forests are large sinks for CO2. And over the past 2 decades, temperate forests have increased their sink capacity by about 33%, while tropical forests have declined theirs due to land use change, such as deforestation. Reasons as to why temperate forests remain a strong sink lies in their increased growth after large-scale agriculture, grazing, and harvesting, as well as CO2 fertilization, all of which has increased plant biomass density and land area for growth. So to understand how plants can offset atmospheric CO2, we have to look at how gas is exchanged on a molecular level through photosynthesis and respiration. Photosynthesis is a process in which plants take up atmospheric CO2 and uses water and light to convert that carbon dioxide into sugar stored as part of its biomass while producing oxygen that we breathe. However, many people do not realize that plants also respire or breathe out CO2, which is photosynthesis in reverse. Plants use the sugar they produced and oxygen and use metabolic energy to further maintain their metabolism and growth, which produces water and CO2 that enters back into the atmosphere. Now, the rate of photosynthesis depends on things like nitrogen, soil moisture, light and stand age, and respiration depends on soil environment, leaf area, and photosynthetic rate. However, the rates of both of these processes are dependent on temperature and is species dependent. Let's look at how temperature has changed in the northeastern United States. In this region of the United States, the average air temperature has become much warmer over the last 126 years. This graph shows the departure of the average annual temperature from the 20th century average over the last 126 years in the Northeast. If you were to draw a trend line across the last 100 years or so, we'd find that temperatures have risen on average 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit. And if we look closely at the latter years only, the warming has increased at a faster rate of about half a degree Fahrenheit per decade. In the Hudson Valley region of New York State, this year's summer temperature averages have departed from the century average by about 3.7 degrees Fahrenheit alone. Of course, there are interannual variability, where some years are cooler than others, but over the last decade, the departure from the mean has been consistently above the century average. Scientists have observed and came to understand that plants have always moved or migrated to environments that are best suited for them. And this has been happening ever since the last ice age ended over 11,000 years ago. But because the climate is changing over the land in every part of the world, and doing so very fast, plants are having a hard time keeping up. In fact, scientists think they need to migrate up to 10 times faster than they did before in order to be successful and live their best lives. Researchers have stated that future projections estimate that a large percentage of species are committed to extinction given their understanding of migration capacity. So without the help of humans to actively migrate plants to better areas with suitable climates, we ask, how will plants respond to this rapid change in air temperature if they were to stay right where they are? Since the early 1800s, observations of organismal responses to climate change have been recorded, and we can expect even more drastic responses to occur as projected air temperatures increase by 2 to 5.5 degrees Celsius over the next century. There's no doubt that climate change has induced many types of pressures on forest organisms in which migration events have arisen. However, plants are sessile and thus more vulnerable, relying solely on seed dispersal, successful establishment, and reproduction to ensure a thriving population. Some other observations that scientists have documented include a lengthening of the growing season for plants and an earlier flowering phenology. Spring and summer are usually times of year when plants start to put out leaves and absorb the sun's energy to grow. With the temperatures outside getting warmer year after year, scientists are noticing that the range of time when plants are actively growing is getting longer, and the flowers that plants grow in order to reproduce starts to happen earlier. These plants are not just moving anywhere. Instead, plants in general are moving or migrating north or poleward, such as towards Canada or up mountains, which are cooler and less stressful than they are now. Take a look at this photo, which was taken in Sweden near the tree line, which marks the boundaries of the Arctic. The image on the top shows the shrub colonization of the area in 1977 compared to shrub colonization in 2009, which is at the bottom. As temperatures have increased here, we can see how much vegetation has increased closer to and past the Arctic tree line. This and many other examples across the world has provided evidence of trees migrating to areas that were once upon a time not suitable for habitation. So how will plants respond to changes in climate? Trees can respond in one of three ways. They can either persist, migrate to suitable habitat, or become extirpated from the local region. Here we see that under different emission scenarios, the temperatures of New York State could actually start to feel like temperatures that would occur as far south as Georgia. So an important question arises: what would happen to the trees here, which aren't used to Georgia temperatures? Will the forests in Georgia begin to migrate up to New York? And what species will be able to survive here? Of course, for plants here, the first line of defense is persistence, which will require species to be long-living, have high stress tolerances, and produce dormant seeds. These traits describe the red oak, which is the dominant tree species in our region. Its range is centrally located here in New York and able to tolerate a range of temperatures that occur in the warmer regions of the south and cooler regions of the north. But projections on abundance and habitat suggests that certain areas will lose abundance, while northern areas increase abundance and suitable habitat while maintaining its full range. Pignut hickory, or Carya glabra, is a southern range species whose northern edge hits the Hudson Highlands region of New York. As temperatures become warmer, its predicted abundance and range is not only noted to expand, but extend northward. There have been predictions of species range shifts, such as the one shown here for paper birch. This model predicts paper birch moving out of this region. A study published in 2008 by researchers at Black Rock Forest in New York summarized these changes in forest composition over 76 years. In total, they found that 3 species were extirpated from the forest and 11 trees had migrated in naturally or anthropogenically. The tree species that had minimal abundance or migrated out of the forest included black spruce and paper birch. Both had minimal abundance and weren't able to successfully thrive and reproduce in large populations. However, these trees are considered northern range trees, as you can see by the range that's extended northward into Canada. Dutch elm disease was a fungal disease that eradicated most of the living elm trees across the nation, and the American elm is considered to be a centrally located tree or centrally ranged tree. Here I'm showing 2 species that I sampled that co-occur at Black Rock Forest that have a predominantly southern range distribution, and that's catalpa and tulip poplar. So, how could tree migration and species replacement affect the carbon storage potential of northeastern U.S. forests? Well, oaks have been around this region for thousands of years, and since the ending of large-scale agriculture over 200 plus years ago, they've become the dominant tree species here. We know that their long-term persistence is due to their inherent physiological and physical traits once they've established and matured, and their dominance and regrowth in our forests has helped make this region a carbon sink. Unfortunately, we also know that oaks are threatened by a number of factors that affect their ability to successfully recruit and establish the new oaks in the forest. These include a loss due to periodic disturbances such as lightning strikes or ice storms that damage or kill mature oaks in the overstory. Absence of fires has allowed for fire-sensitive species to compete with understory oaks, which have poor physiological performances compared to red maple and black birch. And the largest threat includes deer browsing, which has drastically inhibited oak regeneration, making it easier for migrant or other introduced species to fill the oak's vacant niche. The replacement of oaks by introduced or migrant tree species may not only reduce a set of important ecosystem services oaks provide, but negatively influence carbon storage capacity of this forest, potentially changing the forest from a sink of CO2 to a source, further perpetuating warmer atmospheric temperatures. In the most recent IPCC report, models of projected CO2 concentrations vary greatly, and in some cases over or underestimate these concentrations from the observed values we are seeing today. An article published in BBC News highlights research being conducted that may provide evidence to support that global climate models have underestimated the amount of CO2 being absorbed by plants, as they aim to explain why models are consistently overestimating the growth rate of carbon in the atmosphere. Scientists say that between 1901 and 2010, living things absorbed 16% more of the gas than previously thought. This may be a good thing. However, these new calculations are unlikely to make a difference to global warming predictions. Although many climate models incorporate physiological traits of trees in a broad sense, they are lacking species differences and forest type differences in their models. And reasons why include a lack of empirical data. So working out the amount of carbon dioxide that is taken up by trees is critical to estimating the future impacts of CO2 on temperatures. This schematic shows the local adaptation of trees to their historical climate. On the left, blue trees are adapted to cold environments, while yellow trees are adapted to warm temperatures, with green trees somewhere in the middle of that range. With climate change, we can expect to get a mismatch between the genotypes of populations and climate they find themselves in. Gray trees represent mortality or health problems that's associated with a maladaptation. So we ask, can these trees from differing historical climatic provinces adapt to a changing climate? And if so, how do they do that physiologically? This graph shows the response of both photosynthesis and respiration to temperature. Each species has a different optimal temperature at which photosynthesis, or carbon gain, is at its highest, and in return, respiration, or carbon loss, is low enough to maximize net carbon gain. As temperatures increase, photosynthesis deviates from its optimum and decreases, while respiration increases, decreasing net photosynthesis. In this scenario, the temperature response of this plant's physiology is not able to acclimate or have the ability to compensate by changing their physiology back to optimal levels. In an acclimation scenario, the photosynthetic and respiration rate would bounce back to a similar optimum at a new temperature. Smith and Duke published a graph showing the physiological response to a stimulus through time, and lays out when acclimation and eventual adaptation will occur. The respiration and photosynthetic response to warming is symbolized by the dotted and dashed line, respectively. After warming, the photosynthetic response increases and dips before it reaches homeostasis at a rate that is similar to where it began. Similarly, the respiration, we find an instantaneous increase and leveling off at a rate similar to before the stimulus. Smith and Duke found this in their experiment with red oaks, grown in the field under different temperatures. Cool, ambient, and warm-grown plants showed similar assimilation rates or photosynthesis once the plants got used to their new growing temperatures. If the physiology of northern or cool adapted trees, central and southern ranged or warmer adapted trees acclimated to a growing environment in which they all coexisted in, we would expect to find a similar pattern where these groups would have exhibited similar rates of photosynthesis and respiration to each other. As for respiration, researchers have created a schematic to show one of two types of acclimation. Here is a graph of respiration response on the y-axis to temperature on the x-axis. In both type 1 and type 2 acclimation, a plant grown under ambient temperatures will show an exponential increase in respiration when temperatures increase. However, for type 1 acclimation, when warm-grown plants are exposed to high temperatures, their respiration rates will be lower than a plant that did not experience a temperature change. For my study, I attribute this response to a short-term acclimation and would expect this response to occur in mature existing leaves that were once in their ambient temperature and are then exposed to a high temperature. The type 2 acclimation describes more of a long-term response to temperature, where, for example, a new plant or new leaf were to grow under a new temperature regime. Here we would find rates of respiration not only differing at low temperatures, but also showing lower rates of increase under higher temperatures. To answer these questions about how trees are responding to climate change physiologically, I sampled 6 individuals from 21 different tree species that all co-occur at Black Rock Forest, which is located about an hour and a half north of New York City in the Hudson Highlands region of New York State. With the help of colleagues, I was able to collect tree branches high in the canopy using a shotgun. We would bring these branches down and place them into a portable photosynthesis machine, which is able to detect how much CO2 gas is being assimilated in order to estimate the rates of photosynthesis and respiration. We took these gas exchange measurements under different temperatures and found interesting trends that not only revealed physiological differences across species, temperature, and the interaction of both, but differences in their physiological response to temperature across northern, central, and southern range trees. Unfortunately, my data presented in this paper suggests that resident or central range trees found at Black Rock Forest may have a physiological disadvantage under warmer conditions when compared to their migrant counterparts. Northern red oak, the dominant tree in our forest, is among the central range group, and its persistence in this region may be more threatened as more faster growing and physiologically competitive plants are moving into the region. I published the results on the respiration of these trees in the Tree Physiology Journal in 2018 and have collected data on the photosynthetic response to increasing temperatures, which will be soon available for public consumption. As certain populations of tree species become less resilient to a changing climate, many scientists and forest managers are debating the actions that could be taken to help conserve forested communities. Assisted migration, or the intentional movement of organisms to places that would increase the probability of their future persistence, has become a hot topic of debate. The ethics of these actions prompts us to ask ourselves if humans should even intervene. Should we aim to preserve our lands and manage to keep them the same, or accept change and let things go? Perhaps it is the end of the wild and striving to maintain our forests to how they looked pre-colonialism is untenable. Regardless of these questions, it will be up to us to ensure sustainability of our resources and conservation of our lands that maintains the integrity of flow of ecosystem services from which all of us benefits. With that, I leave this quote by American author Robert Jordan, who wrote, "The oak fought the wind and was broken. The willow bent when it must and survived." Thank you.